I never understood Elden Ring before I played it for the first time this year, and not for the reasons you might assume. A friend of mine had been trying to get me to play it for at least 1, maybe 2 years, but I just never bought in. Now, not for lack of enjoyment or belief that I wouldn't like the game. By all accounts, it should be a perfect fit. Berserk is my favorite piece of fiction of all time, and my favorite genre to write and read is fantasy. The reason I didn't pick up the game is I just assumed I understood all there was to know. Elden Ring is a dark fantasy video game set in the Lands Between, and while playing through From Software's notoriously difficult boss battles, the story creates an allegory for pushing onward through life, building self-efficacy. It's odd how a dark fantasy game can heal someone, working as a physical expression of working out through depression, tragedy, death, or just a cruel world. But it does, and so does all dark fantasy. You've heard it all before. And honestly, above all, I am not a gamer. I've played a handful of titles for sure, but that's the long and short of it. I am not the person that could actually beat Elden Ring. And thankfully, I was wrong. One of the first things this game teaches you is that you, a Tarnished, are returning back to the Lands Between in order to do something. To accomplish whatever that is, a Finger Maiden guides and accompanies you on their travels, offering wisdom and advice. Without prior knowledge of the Lands Between, you'd be completely lost in this world, which is why it's such a big deal that when you start your playthrough, that your maiden has already died. And because your maiden is dead, you should be forced to navigate this world completely on your own. But instead you are approached by a woman named Melina, who, for some reason, offers to perform the role of a maiden in place of your original one that was already killed. While this may feel as though this returns the state of the story and you as a character back to the status quo, it actually reinforces something that your maidenlessness did at the beginning of the story. Melina is a spirit without a body, and you are a Tarnished without a maiden. The two of you exist outside of the usual bounds of fate, uniquely positioned to engage with this world. While Melina does play the role of your maiden, she tells you she cannot offer you much advice and accurately play the part she is supposed to. So the question is, what does that mean for you? You have to admit it's a strange start to a game. Even with Marika's Sights of Grace, the ability to level up, and my friends helping me in call, I almost quit playing. There's an incredibly steep learning curve, all for a quest of lordship that maybe lets you help this world from the place that it's in. Hey, if you don't mind me asking, what was the state of this world? Oh, I am so glad you asked me that. A long time ago, Queen Marika the Eternal ruled the Lands Between, and everything was kind of sweet. Her husband, the first Elden Lord, was a warrior who helped make her reign a unified front, and together they had a bunch of children. After Marika took something called the Rune of Death and gave it to her half-brother Malekith, it ushered in the Age of the Golden Order. All of this was made possible, yes, of course, by conquest, seduction, and politics, but also the infamous Elden Ring, a ring that more or less allowed the Queen to ascend to godhood and become a vessel to the greater will, a godlike force that transcends the Lands Between entirely and exists beyond the player's direct engagement. This ring literally and metaphorically held the entire Age of the Golden Order together, but for some reason, Queen Marika decided to shatter it, putting herself in a suspended state holding a crucified position while still allowing her to influence the world and Tarnished through her Sights of Grace. The shattering is the turning point that allows this world to bring back the Tarnished, aka you, into the Lands Between, and the Sights of Grace guide all Tarnished to potentially becoming the next Elden Lord. Every boss you meet in the game stands between you and that goal, and that is the point of the game. Knowing that there was at least some semblance of a greater story going on here, I decided to press forward just a little further. After all, it can't be that bad. At this point, I was literally playing the game on Saturdays in calls with my friends, so I might as well stick it out for a little while longer. If not for myself, then for them. The expectations I had for Elden Ring were far too underwhelming at this point though. I knew it wasn't going to be an overwhelmingly emotional experience or teach me I could power through anything just by building self-efficacy by beating bosses. That lesson that I expected was shockingly stale, and while technically doing that as I took down mini-boss after mini-boss, it just felt underwhelming. And that was when Elden Ring finally opened up and taught me the true lesson that it had for me all along, and the moment I got hooked on everything it had to offer.
Someone must extinguish
Margit the Fell Omen is the first true wall that most players will face upon engaging with Elden Ring properly. His boss battle took me anywhere between 50 and 70 attempts, as he does an incredible job at teaching the player how to approach these fights going forward. His fast combos have staggered timings that directly punish panic rolling, which is something that you have probably already started to graft into your muscle memory. There are a lot of areas in the game where you might find yourself spamming that roll button in order to avoid an ambush so you can pop a potion, which sets you up to be stutter stunted on by Margit. He also encourages sneaking through bosses instead of simply just slamming your head against the wall. You might think that for someone struggling to even engage that well with this game as a whole, running face first into Margit would extinguish my flame. But that isn't what happened. About 20 or so tries in, I'd gotten Margit to about half health, and it was there that I started to realize what this game was actually teaching me. Elden Ring wasn't a game about self-efficacy or actualization at all. I mean, it was, but that falls a bit shallow to what getting close to Margit actually felt like. What I took away from this fight, with each attempt pulling me further and further into the thrill of the game, is that the Tarnished isn't just enduring, they are inevitable. And by extension, so was I. So long as I kept walking into that boss fight with an attempt to win in mind, I defeated Margit from the very moment I entered that arena for the first time. And from the very moment I actually beat Margit, in my mind it was the same as though I had beaten the entire game. Only it hadn't actually happened yet. From the moment I started, I had already won. And it's strange to see a game like this at all, because it reframes how you engage with everything. No time is exactly wasted, because you are always going to win. As long as you keep playing, it's impossible to not eventually beat the game. And each time you inch ever so closer, it isn't a flip of will something or won't something happen, but instead, is this the moment I've been expecting to see? And personally, I started to feel this effect creep its way into my everyday life. As soon as I was clocked into work, I was clocked out. As soon as I started to learn something, I would have gotten the hang of it. It was as though all these little things set in motion suddenly became a forward-rolling snowball cosmically destined in the history of the world. Winning, succeeding, being, becoming was inevitable, and all I had to do was keep drawing blood. That was the lesson that Elden Ring taught me, and the first thing that subverted my expectations and smoldered the flame of ambition for the first time ever. But if that's the lesson, why is there still more runtime in this video? The second major boss you might find is a monster who goes by Godric the Golden. Remember earlier when I mentioned that Queen Marika and her husband, the first Elden Lord, had lots of children together? Well, this is one of those descendants, a member of the royal family and diluted blood remnant of the Golden lineage. However, just upon looking at him, something doesn't quite appear right. His body is this strange amalgamation of different parts and instruments, protruding hands and arms and legs shooting this way and that. Upon initiating a battle with him, Godric's boss title isn't the Golden anymore, although maybe it was at some point. Instead it reads as Godric the Grafted. As you travel to this fight, you can find dialogue of people telling you exactly what has been happening at Stormvale Castle where Godric reigns. Through some magical and holy power, likely due to his tie to the Golden lineage, Godric has learned the ability to graft organic and non-organic life together and put them under the same stream of consciousness. The monsters you see about Stormvale and the very first one you meet at the beginning of the game are, like he is, grafted together by his power. Why Godric started to do this, simply put, is inadequacy. As a distant member of the Golden lineage, Godric was counted among the royals, but not at all as powerful or respected by them. His arrogance of his blood wasn't equal to the power he received because of that blood, at one point having lost a duel to another demigod of true blood, humiliated and forced to escape under illusion. A weakling and a coward, Godric still desperately tries to get the approval of his ancestors, especially the first Elden Lord Godfrey. Simply put, nowadays and maybe always, Godric is just a big bully that is strong enough to pick on people that are weaker than him, but cowers when faced with an actual difficulty. Since many of his challengers are not of royal blood or not as strong as he is, he considers them brave, and takes their bodies and augments their limbs onto him as though somehow that will make him braver and stronger than he actually is. That is the man that we see when we actually arrive in his boss arena. However, what makes this fight more curious and even more interesting is what happens when you bring him down to half health and he makes a desperate bid to try and turn the tables a final time.
of dragons. Lend me thy strength.
In order to understand what exactly just happened, we need to understand a little bit more about dragons within this world. See, everything that opposes the Golden Order's faith in Queen Merica is deemed a great sin and heresy. Of course though, especially now after the shattering of the Elden Ring, other religions are still in practice. One of these are dragon cultists. The ancient dragon cult worship dragons for their power and study their incantations. However, while this is merely heretical in the eyes of the Golden Order, a darker version of this exists within the world as well. Dragon communionists partake of the dragon powers just like the dragon cultists, only in a much darker way. By exchanging the hearts of slain dragons and partaking of them in communion, these blasphemers are able to gain access to very powerful spells. By augmenting the heart of a dragon within them, they gain a corrupted shortcut to power. In a way, it's almost exactly how Godric, in a final desperate plea for strength after a lifetime of being weak and unworthy, augments the head of a dragon onto his body in the same spiritual way that dragon communionists do with dragon hearts. What Godric is doing here is the exact antithesis of everything he claims to be, and everything his blood said he might have been able to be otherwise. And what's even more frightening is, in the same way that you, the Tarnished, the player, find inevitability in your quest to beat the game and become Elden Lord, Godric crafted himself a dragon head, always rejected, always looked down upon, until he finally became what he behaved and everyone treated him like, a disgrace to the Golden Order and the lineage of the demigods. Godric, unable to let go of the idea that he was golden, that he was descended from godhood, ended up destroying himself by clinging desperately to something that he never was. It almost feels like from the moment that he was born, Godric was destined to be here, grafting a symbol of blasphemy onto his own body, dying not even moments later, still clinging to what once might have been. When I learned about Godric's story, it was the second time I had started to orbit around this idea of inevitability within the game, and to be truthful, Godric's was more relatable and compelling than even our character's version as the Tarnished. The Tarnished exist outside the inherent pull of destiny, a bidding lord without a maiden, but you or I are not exceptions in this way. I certainly am not. Maybe it is possible for the Tarnished to be inevitable in his victory, but for someone like me, it is more likely that I will be swept up in the undertow of other identities or labels or titles that others had given me or I gave myself to maintain a sense of self. In the same way, Godric holds on to his title as Golden even while committing a horrible, horrible heresy according to his own bloodline. As easy as it is to make fun of and take part in clowning on Godric, I found a lot of sympathy for him. And I guess that was the question for a long time. How long are you willing to hold on to something that is destroying you, even if all you get from it is a sense of identity from the destruction? Are you more like the Tarnished, or are you more like Godric? The question can feel silly upon initial read, then uncomfortable upon consideration. Lots of Elden Ring video essays before have talked about how this game, and Souls-likes in general, equate a lot to real life, like I mentioned at the top of the video. But almost all those angles give you, the viewer, all the agency in the world. The bosses are your personal demons, and your slowly chipping away is powering through depression for a small sight of grace before gearing up to go back to war. But seeing Godric, the game pulled me into considering what someone could be holding on to, a title, an idea, a wound that they'd built their internal world around. And even if it's wrong, even if it's painful, desperately holding on to that, knowing that one day it will inevitably destroy you. That is the question that Elden Ring posed to me, and the question that I desperately hoped the game would answer as I continued to play. But I have a new question for you, the person watching this video. What does it look like when you hold on to something that gives you identity, even if that thing threatens to destroy you? Not, I guess, what it looks like when the destruction is ongoing, happening in the present tense. We saw that with Godric. I mean when it's already done. Heading a little further north up on the map, we can find the answer to that question. Located in the upper chambers of a grand, beautiful library flanked and guarded by sorcerers, you can find Rennala, the Queen of the Full Moon. Upon arriving to her chamber, you can find her floating in the air, clinging desperately to what appears to be a big orange egg. There is a profound sense of sadness and melancholy to her. She is surrounded by what she calls sweetings, members of her library and former students who can crawl and sing obediently for the Queen of the Full Moon. Each and every one of these sweetings are strange beings of Renala's own creation. What she's actually holding there is the egg that contains something called the Great Rune of the Unborn, and it allows her to rebirth people over and over again. However, while incredible in theory, it ultimately leaves these test subjects slowly going insane after rebirths, rendering these people in this sort of perverted surrogate childhood to a quote-unquote mother in Renala. While it's easy to write Renala off as merely a mad woman that is obsessed with motherhood and her role, it's important we understand why she got this way before we find her. I mentioned earlier that Godfrey and Queen Marika the Eternal had kids together, but alongside those, another family of equal importance was yielding their own offspring. That would be Queen Renala herself and a god by the name of Radagon. Queen Renala, while not a god or a demigod, was an overwhelmingly powerful mortal skilled at moon sorcery, so much so that she had forced Radagon, her then enemy who is a god, to give up on his conquest of her land and settle for marriage. The two had 3 children together, and at some point during their union, Renala fell deeply in love with her husband. However, the other power couple in the land ended up parting ways. Queen Marika banished her husband Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, away so that he and his army could become stronger. But because of that, there was now no Elden Lord in the lands between. Radagon, eager to fill that role and become the second Elden Lord of Queen Marika the Eternal, left Renala alone, causing her to fall into a deep heartbreak. And now all he does is try to repair the Elden Ring that Queen Marika, his second wife, now shattered. It caused the Queen of the Full Moon to go insane with grief, clinging desperately to that egg, a gift that her former husband gave to her, as though clinging desperately and aching for what's been lost. Renala is the game's escalation of what Godric was and was becoming before we stepped in and killed him prematurely. A woman who was deeply in love with her husband and her family, but was ultimately brutally betrayed. And unable to let go of the memory and heartache of what she had, Renala rebirths her sweetings over and over, playing the role of a woman who yearns to be a mother and a wife once again, but ultimately is unable to fulfill that wish. Renala is unable to let go of an old label, one that Radagon's betrayal stripped her of course, but ultimately, Renala is not able to free herself of being his wife in the same way Godric is unable to let go of the thought that he was maybe at one point golden. This is the game showing you what inevitability looks like when allowed to consume itself. See, what Elden Ring provides the player with, not the tarnished, the player, is the ability to grapple with this question. Do you let go of what you cling to and enter into something potentially cold, dangerous, and unknown? Or do you choose to stay draped and shielded by the illusion of what you already know, even if what you already know is painful and leads to destruction? Renala was the most emotionally and logically provocative character for me on my first playthrough, and it's because of this precise reason. Seeing this broken woman, a wife, a mother, a husk of her former self, consumed by a burden and labels she couldn't let go of, in conjunction with this idea of inevitability we've been orbiting around, really got me thinking of, well, what does this egg look like in my own life? For now, it's time to take a step back from this game entirely in order to see what it's been pointing us to all along, because Elden Ring is a game that's more than a game. About 3 or so years ago, I was introduced to a video game called Fear and Hunger, a video game that, to this day, the mere existence of captivates me on some primal level. For the uninitiated, this is a dark fantasy video game to end all dark fantasy video games. Taking place inside of the titular dungeons of Fear and Hunger, the game is unbelievably graphic and cruel. The reason that someone is compelled to enter these dungeons can be as diverse as going to seek out enlightenment or attempting to carry out an assassination. And what lies within these walls are horrible things that I can't show much of on screen. I had a bit of a phase where I learned about the lore, watched some playthroughs, and really sat with this puzzling piece of fiction. And what puzzled me wasn't the story or the sheer unfairness of the gameplay itself, but instead how comforting the dungeons were to me. Now that may seem psychopathic, but the reason why is a bit multifaceted. I'm sure you're aware of the idea that dark fantasy as a whole concept brings a lot of comfort to people who have gone through any kind of struggle. Like Godric, I have desperately wanted to be something that I am just not anymore, and maybe never was, and like Renala, I've had my identity stripped away from me, leaving me to pick up the pieces by myself. What I have shared with both of them is that I have desperately tried to maintain that which I lost, but what I have also tried to do is to lean in. There was an interesting documentary I watched once a long time ago. Honestly, I can't even remember what the name of it was, but the part I saw was an anonymous interview with a sex worker, one of the questions being, "Why did you even get into sex work? Was it the money?" And the woman's reply was, "I was taken advantage of when I was a teenager. I felt like sex work was a way I could reclaim myself. The money was part of it, for sure, but I was hoping that if I took pride in what I was ashamed of, it would make me feel better. I don't think that it did." In this woman's individual experience, she leans in. And while leaning into the wound is common, I don't want to make it seem trivial. There's an idea that if only you enjoyed and allowed yourself to be ruled by the external label or adapted to what was stripped away, then you would reclaim your power. Personally, I have leaned in before. I have assimilated myself with what I hated and did not want, borderline worshipping unsavory states of mind. It is, simply put, disillusionment masking as contentment, more dangerous than a mere wound, because this wound not only goes untreated, but must be reopened in order to prove that it cannot heal. Fear and hunger represents that place to me. It's a world where hope, real hope, is basically completely dead. I mentioned at the top of this video that Berserk is my favorite piece of fiction ever, and it has my favorite illustration of this. The main character, Guts, has been branded not only by a mark that causes him to be hunted by demons, but also the title called Struggler. He is the one who, through sheer force of will, rage, and determination, defies fate itself. By the midpoint of the story, Guts is traveling alone and endures his demons alone, unable to be with others for fear of what could happen, but more importantly, fear of what he must walk away from. The Berserker armor is a beautiful piece of gothic battle protection, supernatural in its abilities. It grants the wearer unbelievable physical strength, speed, and immunity to pain, bypassing the limits of a human body. However, prolonged use of it will result in loss of senses, irreversible physical harm, and permanent psychological damage. There is no reason to return to wear such an item unless one deemed it necessary to their own survival. A little before this is made so clear to the reader by being physical armor, this idea is spoken of in chapter 129 of the manga in a conversation between Guts and a blacksmith. This older man, attempting to provide Guts with a little wisdom, says, "Why not run away from war, from hatred? Even more than a blood-rusted sword, vengeance is something you choke and sharpen in blood. You sink the blade called your heart deep into blood in order to fix the nicks called sorrow. The more you sharpen it, the more it rusts, so you sharpen it again. In the end, all that's left is a pile of rust and scraps. The thing about hatred, it's the place where people who can't look sorrow in the eye without wavering run off to. You've got some huge nicks in your heart. You went alone again. On that day 2 years ago in your hopeless suffering, you left the last irreplaceable things you had and you went away by yourself. You were right beside those irreplaceable things, yet you couldn't bear to immerse yourself together in sorrow with them. So instead you ran away so that your own malice could burn inside of you. At the critical moment you go and choose yourself and rely on fighting. You're like a drawn sword on the battlefield, one with countless nicks soaked in blood and rusting, with a lethal crack in it. A sword that's begun to break." To lean in, I believe, is not only a thing that happens, but perhaps the most common way that people can self-medicate. There was a story about a little boy who sailed across a horrible, horrible storm in a rowboat by himself. By the time that he reached the land, he had grown into a teenager, and before long, was an adult. But before he started to walk on the land, he hoisted up the boat and carried it on his back. After a few years, he came to meet a camel herder tending to his animals in the desert. He asked the boy, who was now a man, "Why do you carry a boat with you?" And the man replied, "I must, because one day it may rain again." The camel herder, perplexed, asked, "Isn't it heavy and exhausting carrying that boat with you all across the sand?" Of course, the camel herder knew that it was, and still he awaited the response. "It is heavy. It is heavy, but one day it will rain again. So today, even while there is sun in the sky, I have to keep it close. Otherwise it will rain again." Fear and hunger was that boat for me, and the thing that could make it rain. Many things have been the boat: lies, dispositions, behaviors, and beliefs. What might have saved you at one point will eventually become the thing that destroys you if you cannot let go, if you can't put it down. That little rowboat is being called golden to Godric, or being a mother to Rennala. Fear and hunger, leaning in, would have you believe that you're changing. You are taking the wood of that boat, disassembling it, and swearing you're making something better. But either way, when you look down at your hands, you will still find splinters. Whether you augment or refinish the boat or keep it hoisted for rain, either way, you still carry the wound. What Elden Ring does is it takes that wound and it gives it to everyone that you fight within the main storyline. Never the same, of course. For some it would be physical, for others emotional and psychological. It will exist at different increments of its lifespan, before or after, and yet when you look at these characters, you're going to find their boat. That's what I find most compelling about this story. Heck, about this world. This is a world desperately, hopelessly clinging on to nothing but something that is broken, something that wounds itself. For the first 22 years of my life, that is how I have been too. Unmade, remade, and rewounding. And the most interesting part about that is we know the answer. I always knew the answer of what that little boy should do with the boat. He should finally put it down. Simple and hopelessly impossible. And so the question is, what does it look like to see hope that one day that can actually happen, that one day you can let go? At the beginning of the game, you have the opportunity to meet what appears to be a young woman by the name of Renna. At least that's what she calls herself. But upon even only a couple moments with her, things start to feel a little strange. She has 4 hands and what looks like 2 faces, or at least one real face and one face that floats like an afterimage beside her. Renna is initially presented as an enigma who is potentially a player in this world at a higher level, but is not allowed to articulate how much until the midway point of her questline after you progress through a bit of the game. See, this woman's name isn't actually Renna, it's Ranni. Ranni is a connoisseur of both cold and moon magic, having studied it extensively. She is, spell for spell, probably the strongest magic user in the entire game, and she's also the key to everything that we've talked about thus far. Let's go back to that family tree graphic we had following Godfrey, Marika, Rennala, and Radagon after they broke up. I mentioned earlier that Godric was a descendant of the Golden lineage, which means you might expect to see some direct offspring, and of them we do. In fact, do you remember Margit from the beginning of this video? He is the direct son of Queen Marika the Eternal and Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. The couple of Radagon and Rennala also had offspring before Radagon left his wife to be with Queen Marika, which consisted of 3 children. There were 2 boys by the name of Rykard and Radahn, who were both a praetor and a war general respectively, but the 3rd child of Radagon and Rennala was a girl named Ranni. Ranni took very much after her mother, becoming a master of all things magic and associated with the moon and the stars. If you opt to follow Ranni's questline since the beginning of the story, and after you defeat her mother, you will learn more about her intentions and discover 2 very important things about Ranni. The first is that she is a very sleepy woman, and the second is that she isn't too fond of the Golden Order or godhood in general. In fact, she kind of hates the entire Golden Order altogether, and she is actively in rebellion against the Greater Will and the 2 Fingers. While it's easy to deduce that Ranni deeply loves her mother and is very likely upset by her father's leaving for Queen Marika as part of her hatred, it would be a bit shallow to say that all she really cares about is destroying the Golden lineage for something like revenge. Ranni is too smart, calculated, and, dare I say, empathetic to keep her reasons explicitly that selfish. But it's hard to get a clear picture of Ranni's nature, motivations, and desires without examining her brothers, who are both philosophical opposites and represent different angles regarding that metaphorical boat that we talked about earlier. Rykard, like Ranni, fundamentally opposes the Golden Order and godhood in general, even though he served as a praetor for the Golden lineage for a very long time. Eventually, though, he became overt in his desire to destroy the Golden Order, assimilating with an entity known as the God-devouring serpent and becoming the Lord of Blasphemy. Losing to him in his boss fight will prompt the voice line,
Together we will devour the very god.
showing that even in this monstrous state, he holds that very fundamental goal of destroying godhood as it exists in the lands between. Her other brother was a war general named Radahn, widely known and considered to be the strongest demigod in the history of the entire mythos of the world. Unlike his siblings Ranni and Rykard, Radahn was enamored and admired the legends of old, especially the first Elden Lord Godfrey. Strangely though, Radahn was less a bloodthirsty warlord and more like a noble general. Despite his massive size, Radahn chose not to abandon his fragile steed Leonard, instead learning gravity magic so he could continue to ride it into battle, even becoming proficient in it enough that he was able to single-handedly hold back the stars from moving. His innate kindness was uncharacteristic to the other demigods, his only weakness being his undying loyalty to all he admired. While it made him a fantastic leader of men and caused everyone in his service to treat others with respect and honor, it bound him into the cycle and rule of Queen Marika and the Golden Lineage at large. And now in the present day, the Radahn you fight is all but a shadow of his former self, having been inflicted by a disease known as the Scarlet Rot, fighting mindlessly in a mess of compulsion and fragmented identity. But if we simplify things down, both of these characters in their own way lean into. Rykard into destruction and Radahn into the pre-existing infrastructure in the same way I leaned into what we talked about in the previous section. While Radahn was a kind and noble warrior, the strength continued to try and uphold the very broken Golden Order that was responsible for a lot of damage in the world. In the initial conquest of the land, Queen Marika and Elden Lord Godfrey led an attempted genocide against the Fire Giants in order to preserve their reign and protect the Erd Tree. I mentioned very briefly earlier that Marika gave the Rune of Death to her half-brother, but what that did is remove death from the natural cycle of life, meaning the Golden Lineage and those blessed by the Erd Tree would live unnaturally long lives, thus meaning their active participation in the lands between as ruling gods would trample the humans and beings there for much longer. Ideologically, the Golden Order is fundamentalist, but in terms of governance, it's authoritarian. And because the person who sits on the throne is both goddess and queen, what that actually means is everything in the lands between is dictated by a fickle, selfish nature of their ruling god and her influences. Right and wrong, legal and illegal are determined by a flawed being and a flawed system, meaning that no matter how well-intentioned or kind-hearted a person upholding a damaged system is, ultimately the consequences of their actions will be felt by the inhabitants of the land, something that is made overwhelmingly clear when you enter a section of the land known as Caelid, a large area completely destroyed by the Scarlet Rot, a disease that affects and destroys everything and everyone slowly but surely, all of it blooming from the clash and conflict between two demigods trampling this world, one of them being General Radahn himself, who preserves the stagnation of the Golden Lineage, even to the extent of holding the stars still, locking the world in an eternal moment where the Golden Lineage reigns supreme. Rykard, seeing this fundamentalist and authoritarian world in action and destroying its inhabitants, loses his mind attempting to destroy it, symbolically holding on to what he leaned into, not realizing that his ultimate destruction will do to the world what he desperately wanted to save. In order to progress Ranni's questline, the player is forced to defeat General Radahn in battle and allow the stars to move once again to progress her plot forward. A worldview that, while sharing the hatred with Rykard, also shares the ideas of loyalty, love, and preservation that Radahn embodies. So far, in these characters and this world, we've seen three reactions to the imposition of a cycle or a world ruled by wounded people. People who lean into who they believe they are, people who cling to things that they desire, and people who cannot let go. But Ranni represents the fourth option, one that as of now is not completely clear to the player, but one that can't, very critically, oppose everything that you mean for this world. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that you are vying for the Elden Throne and attempting to become the Elden Lord of the Lands Between, and really what that means is you will become the physical ruler of the godlike vessel by becoming her consort. The first and second Elden Lords, Godfrey and Radagon, only needed one requirement in order to claim that throne: marry Queen Marika the Eternal. This entire game leads you into a marriage with the hostile god of this world, a marriage of more symbolic weight as your consort is trapped in suspended animation after you mend the ring that Marika broke at the beginning of the story. I'm sure it will not come as a surprise to you based on how I framed this video that I was not a fan of the Golden Order or godhood in general by this point of the game. It seemed to me that they did irreparably more damage than good, and their selfish nature destroyed not only this world, but also the people of the lands between, trapped in this cycle of godhood and oppression. If I were to keep playing this game, I would become the third Elden Lord, married to Queen Marika and bringing about the cycle all over again, reinventing this cycle that I have seen swallow up and destroy so many of these characters before me. I, as a player, and becoming swept up in the cycle that have put things the way that they are now. As you travel up through Lindell, the capital city of the lands between, you can see a kingdom still limping on post-shattering, still barely hanging on together, and while doing so, you will encounter two very interesting bosses. The first is the golden projection of the first Elden Lord, a mighty warrior still protecting his wife's rule. But the second is their son Morgott, the last of all kings. Earlier in the game, when you fight Margit, that is merely an illusion of projection sorcery. That was the current king overseeing the capital from a distance, watching and surveying you closely. Morgott, returning with his true name and title, remaining loyal despite what his own mother and rule claims about Omen people, is maybe the ultimate example of leaning in, loyalty and love in spite of, making do with what you are rather than being accepted in spite of what people say you are. And this time, what Morgott teaches the player is the exact same. It's about inevitability. If you continue the cycle, if you take that throne, if you become the third consort of Queen Marika the Eternal, there will be a new rule of the lands between where the echo of the golden lineage still lingers on. There will still be a capital city in this nation. There will still be an Erdtree. There will still be an Elden Ring, and your fate will be as inevitable as Morgott's is. Loyal to the throne of a dead goddess, ruling over people tossed by the whims of fading divinity, but fresh selfishness. Which is why I found it strange that Ranni appears to you as Rena at the beginning of the game, and seems to want to help you. It's sort of easy to forget, but Ranni, just like the Tarnished, just like you, is currently being swept up in this inevitability and this cycle. She helps guide you to overthrow the gods of this world, but also encourages you to follow the path provided. You'll discover it's blocked by thorns, and your acting maiden Melina, who has been with you since the beginning of the game, will tell you that this door can only be opened if one commits a cardinal sin and burns the Erdtree in order to gain access, in the process unknowingly making the greatest sacrifice they weren't aware of. The only inconsistency is, why does Ranni want you to burn it, if burning it will help you continue the cycle? In order to burn the Erdtree, you're forced to go forward into the Mountaintop of the Giants, where you will confront perhaps the most unfortunate inevitability this game has to offer. By defeating the fire giant blocking your way to the summit, a fight that is an actual nightmare by the way, the entirety of this section of the game opens up to you and presents the player with a choice at that site of grace there. Should you choose to go straight there and rest, you will receive the option to commit cardinal sin, which is, in the context of the story, burning the Erdtree in order to enter the throne room and become Marika's consort. Now, there's a bit of an oddity happening in this world now that we know this is really an elaborate quest for marriage, and that lies with our finger maiden we were supposed to receive at the beginning of the game. A finger maiden exists to prepare the new Elden Lord to be the husband of Queen Marika. Her wisdom and guidance of the lands isn't merely an assistance unto navigation or cosmology, but an on-the-ground tour of the lands that one day, if all things go well, the Tarnished will one day rule. The finger maiden doesn't ascend with their Tarnished. She does not marry or stay in their service, and up until this point of the game, you may feel a slight confusion and conflict between our loyal finger maiden and our intended marriage to Queen Marika, but nothing has been named. After all, you really have no allies on this journey. Even if you choose to serve Ranni or any other sect in the game, no one really makes as reliable an appearance to help you, all except your acting maiden, Melina. She has been with you since the beginning of the game. She helps you level up, and although claiming she cannot do much, is always there when you need help navigating something unseen or unexpected. She pushes you to become the Elden Lord, and even to burn the Erdtree, and if you do choose to commit a cardinal sin, Melina will ask to hold your hand and put you into a deep sleep, before walking gently to the edge of the cauldron, and Melina starts to burn. I had grown attached to Melina over the course of the game. In a world where every single NPC is out to get you, and where literally everything in this world has the possibility of being lethal, Melina being on screen meant that, at least for right now, you had the advantage. There were no monsters to fight, no illnesses to get away from, and no enemies that might want to kill you. Instead, there was just Melina. And what I find interesting about this inclusion of Melina being a forced sacrifice is how impartial it is across every timeline you can push this world toward. With the sole exception of a single ending, Melina is forced to sacrifice herself to burn the Erd Tree, regardless of which of the other 5 endings that you choose. I'll just go ahead and spoil it, but across the 5 endings in which Melina dies for you, there are endings that are objectively bad, and some that are objectively less bad. There are endings that reinforce the death and destruction of the lands between, and endings where you might not allow that to be the case anymore. But regardless of which you choose, regardless of what you allow to happen, it will always cost a sacrifice. Regardless of whether or not it's for something worthwhile or wasteful, sacrifices will always have to be made. Life is a constant of giving and giving even more. Melina is that idea externalized and made impactful to a player. Godric sacrificed his humanity, Rykard sacrificed his godhood, and Radagon sacrificed his marriage. And we sacrifice our maiden. This sacrifice was always going to happen, and sacrifices are always going to happen in the real world. Question just is, are the sacrifices we are making done in hopes that we can become better because of them? It may be tempting to look at a situation like this and try our very best to avoid a fate like this, as though there is somehow another way where we don't lose something precious to us, whether that be how we see ourselves or someone that we love dearly. If only the game showed us what it would look like if we tried to run away from the sacrifice. On the Mountaintop of the Giants, just west of the First Church of America, you can find a stone prison designed to trap beings that are too dangerous to be contained by normal means. Traveling into one will place you into a 1v1 boss fight between you and whatever is being kept down there. Entering into this one near the church will spawn Roundtable Knight Vike, a powerful boss that at one point before you collected 2 great runes and was destined to become the Elden Lord. But as he stood on the precipice of that mountain and realized what the cardinal sin would cost him, Vike did not allow his maiden to become a sacrifice on his behalf. Instead, he learned of something called the Frenzied Flame, a fire powerful enough to burn the Erd Tree. Intending to use his own flesh as kindling, Vike traveled to receive its power, and instead was driven insane by the fire, causing him to go mad. Whether or not Vike killed her in his madness afterward, or she fell on her own sword because she was robbed of her purpose in burning the Erd Tree, or someone had killed her, Vike's maiden was discovered dead regardless, and due to the fear of his power and what he'd accumulated, Vike was locked away in a prison for all of eternity, all because of his failed attempt at preventing his maiden's sacrifice. Vike desperately tried to avoid this sacrifice, to avoid the pain of now for the potential of tomorrow, and instead sacrifice something just as, if not even more, precious. The fact that you can find Vike so close to where Melina sacrifices herself tells the story of a man who was unwilling to let go, just like so many others in this world. This is the game showing you what you will look like if you cannot do what is necessary to grow and change. You will stagnate, you will lose yourself even more in the same way Renala or Vike or Godric did. Trying to avoid making all hard sacrifices will find you giving up even more than you thought you ever could. This section of the game confronts the player with perhaps the thing that kills most people before they even start to try: fear. Fear of letting go, fear of the present hurt, the desire for things to stay the same. Throughout most of my life, I had accumulated things that I could not let go of. Character traits, sense of identity, sets of belief that I built my life around. Holding on to pain, to negativity, to old wounds and old labels can sound however you want it to sound. You can break apart that boat into a million pieces and glue it back together into a warship. But at the end of the day, you can't call it progress until you get off your hands and knees and start picking splinters out of your flesh. There was a phrase once I heard that went, "Kill the god to embrace the god there is." And all that it really means is, in order to embrace and see what actually exists, whether you believe that is a true living god or a stand-in for a worldview or concept of living, you must let go of preconceived negative beliefs surrounding him and yourself. In this game, where you are quite literally fighting gods and trying to break or uphold a world order, the specific nature of the phrase was not lost on me, and I thought about it the moment that I saw Melina burn for our tarnished. In order for anything to be new, something old must be sacrificed and destroyed always. In order for something to be better, it must be let go of and dismantled. And that was when I realized, what was the point of this entire journey anyway? The whole reason you're on this journey is because Queen Marika, the Eternal, shattered the Elden Ring. Queen Marika made a sacrifice. The Elden Ring is the literal and symbolic item holding together every label she's ever worn. God, Queen, Ruler, Leader, Conqueror, Wife, Mother, Vessel to the Greater Will, and Marika broke it. That was when I had realized the true weight of what exactly she had done, and what exactly this story had been built up to be since the very beginning. Oh my gosh, Queen Marika is trying to let go. Queen Marika is a character that initially didn't make much sense to me toward the beginning of the game. The Sites of Grace all lead to each other and eventually to her, something that does indeed track if she's looking for a new consort to rule the lands between with her power. It's odd that she would though, considering she seems to be stuck in this sort of suspended animation and would choose to seek a third consort. But after all, she did banish her first husband Godfrey and take Radagon, so perhaps Radagon did something that exhausted her and now she desires a new ruler. This could track with her preemptive care for you by creating the Sites of Grace and all, the ability to rest and be guided by your future consort, and especially through the creation of Round Table Hold, either plucked from time and space by Queen Marika or the Greater Will to provide the Tarnished a hub and safe space while on their quest. But located within here is one small inconsistency. Inside one of the rooms you can find an old prisoner, a misbegotten by the name of Smithing Master Hugh. In the game, he functions as one of the only ways that players are able to upgrade their weapons by bringing him items and runes. He was chained up here and given an impossible task: create a weapon powerful enough to slay a god. If you visit Round Table Hold enough, eventually you'll trigger dialogue of him muttering by himself a prayer to Queen Marika.
Oh, your divinity, have mercy and grant me forgiveness. The road is yet long, a god is not easily felled. But one day without fail you will have your wish. So please grant me forgiveness, Queen Marika.
The reason that Master Hugh exists as a prisoner and is given this task is one specifically given by Queen Marika the Eternal. She is the one who put him here in those chains and makes him carry out that task. Why does Queen Marika desire a weapon powerful enough to kill a god? The only god in activity is her. The more that you play this game, the more you dig into the lore, the less Queen Marika looking for a new consort makes any type of sense. Consider all of what we've talked about regarding how the Golden Order operates, how it tilts and pushes the weight of inevitability atop every single person that's involved. Now imagine who sits under the most amount of that weight. Queen Marika is a slave to the Golden Order, to the Elden Ring, and to the Greater Will. Simply put, she is a slave to godhood. In our analogy earlier, Queen Marika is the one who has carried that little rowboat longer than anyone else possibly could have, and whether it be conspiracy, grief, exhaustion, or guilt that triggered the decision, eventually she decided she couldn't take it anymore, and shattered the Elden Ring. Queen Marika does what we've been talking about and what everyone else hasn't been able to do since the beginning of the video. Godric, Morgott, Renala, Rykard, Radahn, none of them are able to let go, but Queen Marika the Eternal is trying. After enough time with this game, engaging in its lore and just progressing the main story, it becomes clear that Marika wants to die and be set free from the cycle that she herself helped create. The weapon that can kill a god, the shattering of the Elden Ring, the needing to burn the Erd Tree, all of it points to a woman unable to defeat her own divinity. But it's strange, isn't it? All of that power, everything she's done and can do and could be, and yet she can't simply just destroy the Elden Ring herself. It's almost like there's a part of this story, of her, that is still holding on. As though some cosmic force, just like in Godric, just like in Renala, just like in everyone else, makes it impossible for her to move on and let go of what needs to be abandoned. After Marika shattered the Elden Ring and destroyed part of her body, during this whole time her second consort Radagon has been desperately trying to repair the ring and restore his wife to her glory once again. If she gets a new consort, then all of his power in the lands between, all of his influence, and possibly the maintenance of this cycle itself is in danger of being compromised. However, before this fight in the capital city of Lindell, you have the opportunity to stand before a statue of Radagon, the second Elden Lord, and cast the incantation Law of Regression. If you do so, the statue of Radagon will mist away and one of Marika will take its place, and in doing so, a message will appear that completely changes the entire perspective of the game. Radagon is Marika. In a similar way the God of the Bible coexists in a trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Radagon and Marika are autonomous yet inseparable versions of each other. Only in this case, instead of working harmoniously, Radagon and Marika are in conflict. Under the influence of the greater will, there's an implied question of free will, whether or not Radagon and Marika are able to keep such a thing on their own. Resisting the two fingers and the greater will sometimes results in losing your autonomy unless you are powerful enough to resist its influence, and even then, it can cause damage. Ranni the witch that we talked about earlier doesn't even actually look like that. As a daughter of Radagon who we now know is Marika, she was an Empyrean, a woman with red hair chosen by the two fingers in order to attempt to become her successor. In order for someone of even that bloodline and proximity to godhood to resist the greater will, Ranni needed to give herself a physical death, but allow her spirit to live on. What you see when talking to her is merely her spirit residing in a doll. Ranni resisting the two fingers by splitting her body and spirit, Marika resisting the two fingers through her split divinity, warring with each other. Radagon is the version of Marika who is trapped just like Godric, Radahn, and Rennala. He is the one trampled by the greater will, the one that cannot bear to allow the wound to be let go of, the one who cannot bear to move on from what is. Marika is the version of Radagon that desperately wants to be free of this divinity and this cycle. She wants to stop being a slave, she wants to put the boat down, but Radagon doesn't let her. The cutscene that plays when you finally reach Marika shows her body dropping down from its crucified position and transforming into Radagon, still holding the weapon used to attempt and repair the Elden Ring, even as broken and shattered as he is. The Lands Between, in the current age you find it, is a place aching with that internal conflict, the war between achieving what you could be and succumbing to what someone is. I've made it sound thus far that the only thing these lands can feel are the pull and the ache of the Golden Order, but equally, they can feel the nature of Radagon and Marika's split personality at war with each other, and that ache is given form through their children. On top of the offspring produced by Marika and Godfrey and Radagon and Rennala, Marika and Radagon also had children. This will be the only time that I dip into DLC spoilers, and the rest of the video will only cover contents found in the base game. There are 2 children of the second marriage that are confirmed via speculation, and 2 confirmed by text, and those 2 are the ones that are the most interesting to us today. Across all of the Lands Between, you can find evidence and references to something called the Scarlet Rot. It is the thing that ate away at General Radahn's mind and caused him to go mad, and it's also the thing that effected a massive corruption of Caelid. I mentioned earlier that Radahn was involved in the battle that took place over that section of the map, and the person he was fighting during that battle was a warrior known as Malenia, something known as an Empyrean, one of the 3 people chosen by the Two Fingers to potentially become the new god of the land and succeed Queen Marika the Eternal, meaning she also shares the same potential to the greater will as Ranni, before Ranni gave herself a physical death in order to rebel. She is also the daughter of Queen Marika and Elden Lord Radagon. However, there was a problem. Malenia was born afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, an illness that would eventually be unleashed when she became a vessel to the outer god of Rot during her fight with Radahn, thus ruining Caelid. Traveling down to the base of the Haggle Tree and the secret section of the map next to the Mountaintop of the Giants, you can find Malenia in the current age, still eaten up by the Rot, having lost her vision and her limbs.
I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella. And I have never known defeat.
Her boss fight is famously one of the hardest in the game, and it took me well over 200 attempts, but what I found most incredible is how tight her storytelling is through her boss fight. The Scarlet Rot is not just some part of the lore texture, but also an actual status element that you can get within the game. Becoming afflicted with the Scarlet Rot will cause your HP bar to start draining for as long as it afflicts you until you either die or reach a site of grace. Malenia's version of the Rot, for some reason, obviously has not been cured, meaning that unlike the player who can cast an incantation or hit a site of grace, she has to find a different way of surviving. Surprisingly, Malenia is very easy to stagger and flinch, meaning that if you get off a good amount of attacks in quick succession, you can chain her for massive amounts of damage in only a few seconds of attacking. When compared to other fights you might find at this point in the game, Malenia's first phase HP is shockingly low. Even bosses you would have fought earlier in the game while you were weaker will boast higher HP counts. As a trade-off, Malenia is incredibly offensive of a boss fight. Most of her major attacks are multi-hit, meaning that getting caught by a single combo is enough to put you on the back foot and force you into perpetually healing while she chains damage off of you. She is basically a glass cannon, and conceptually what that means is she should be relatively weak defensively, but if you allow Malenia to damage you, you have got to be kidding me. She regains health. Malenia is the only major boss in Elden Ring that utilizes the lifesteal mechanic in any form. From a gameplay perspective, giving a glass cannon with a myriad of multi-hit attacks the ability to lifesteal creates a fun game of health bar ping pong, where you can see the damage go up and back down again as you guys trade blows. But what it does from a storytelling perspective is solidify everything you need to know about Malenia into a single mechanic. Malenia, destined for godhood, blessed in combat but afflicted with the rot, must stay present in the moment. She must consistently fight in order to steal life from her enemies and convert it into her own longevity. In order for her as a character to survive, she must keep her head down, so to speak. She is forced to abandon what she might have been for what she is. Simply put, she must become a weapon. It is only fitting that her title is Blade, a thing with no partiality or greater motivation or conviction of their own, simply a tool in the hand of someone else. And that someone else is...
I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella.
Miquella is the twin brother of Malenia. Unlike his blind, withering sister, Miquella was blessed with a brilliant vision and a genius mind. He was able to create instruments that could fend off the influence of the outer gods, and was able to see past the corruption of the Golden Order, desiring to usher in an age of compassion, even making it his life's mission to cure his sister of the Scarlet Rot. Of the three people chosen by the Toothfingers to potentially succeed Marika, Miquella has the most potential in order to do just that. However, just like Malenia, Miquella was born with a curse of his own. Unlike his sister who grew strong and able-bodied, Miquella was cursed with nascency, meaning he would never grow out of the body of a young boy. As a supplement to his overwhelmingly weak physical form, he used his ability to garner affection and compassion to gain allies, such as his sister Malenia, who became his champion and his blade. However, if that were the only thing preventing him from ascension and being the perfect choice for the greater will, he would have already inherited the title. Firstly, Miquella holds resentment and hatred for the greater will for not curing his sister of her illness, abandoning the Golden Order's fundamentalist worldview altogether. Additionally, Miquella, while presenting pristine and perfect, has a tendency to use his ability to spur affection by manipulating people, seen in how he charmed Mohg, his half-brother and the omen twin of Margot, last of all kings. But his most damning weakness isn't his physical nascency, but what it meant for the nature of him as a being. If Malenia's affliction of rot isn't merely a curse unto death, but instead a shackle unto being present and forced into the role of a blade, Miquella's affliction of nascency is a curse of not becoming. Miquella is known to abandon his projects. He also fails and is unable to cure his sister of the rot, and cannot actually bring about an age of true compassion due to his ability to wield people's own love against them. Miquella is a being who cannot become, and Malenia is a being that cannot be. Malenia is caught in the undertow of her father, focused on sustaining and being rather than being able to emerge from the cocoon and become something new, whereas Miquella is caught under the influence of his mother, being able to reach for something and trying to let go of the old, but ultimately being too flawed and unable to do so. And both of them represent their parents' dual nature, the potential of being something new, but the inability to actually achieve it. When I talk about a cycle in Elden Ring, this is exactly the type of thing that I'm talking about. It's a cycle that's not only symbolic, religious, political, or psychological, but also personal. Whether or not the twins' affliction was an oppression of Radagon and Marika's conflicted identity in the direct lore sense, it is unconfirmed. But in terms of what it means symbolically, It doesn't make sense that an entity at war with itself would be able to create offspring capable of being anything other than a slave to their own conflict. These two were unable to actually succeed Queen Marika because, I believe, Queen Marika's internal conflict prevented them from being so. Because of this, Rani, the daughter of Rennala and Radagon, was the only Empyrean left that could be a suitable puppet for the Greater Will. Empathetic, educated, and intelligent, skilled in and out of combat, but like we already talked about, Rani rejected such a notion. I mentioned earlier that I don't believe Rani's core motivations to be hatred for her father or desire to act revenge upon the world. I'm sure it's clear enough to you now, but I believe that Rani's boat is the entirety of the Golden Order. It is the entirety of this world. On a personal level, you get to see what a generational curse looks like when passed from parent onto child through Malenia and Miquella. Malenia carrying that boat, and Miquella desperately trying to reforge it into something beautiful. I could try to give you examples beyond how this is personal to Rani, how it's also symbolic and cosmological and religious, but I think by this point you'll feel how intertwined all of it is. What is personal to someone like Rani will reflect the religious and political cycle of the entire lands between, as it does for Rennala, Radagon, Marika, and everyone else. Generational trauma as a concept is something that I've come to personally experience, even if for not that long. I have felt pulled by the undertow of them, sins and wounds of the past whispering into my ears, even now. All my life, deep down, I believe that one day, no matter how hard I tried, no matter what I did or accomplished, I would end up exactly what I feared I might be, doing something I didn't want to do, as though some hand of fate cosmically rested upon me since I was young and destined me to a life only of failure and cyclical mistakes. Malenia and Miquella in particular are some of the most compelling characters in Elden Ring's lore. When I see them, I see two people desperately pulled by that same causality. Rani was a character that I wasn't sure I could trust for most of the game, but in the end, I ended up seeing her the same way I saw Miquella and Malenia. Only Rani was fighting. She was desperately trying to shatter her own Elden Ring, which is why her motivations cannot be unto revenge or anything that could continue this cycle. If Rani is driven by revenge and justice, she would be like her brother Rykard. If she was driven to create a world of peace and reforge her trauma and pain into something lovely, she would be like Miquella. So what is it that Rani really actually does want?
I thought I might expound a little further upon the order I envision. Mine will be an order not of gold, but the stars and moon of the chill night. I would keep them far from the earth beneath our feet. As it is now, life and souls and order are bound tightly together. But I would have them at a great remove, and have the certainties of sight, emotion, faith, and touch all become impossibilities, which is why I would abandon this soil with mine order.
Rani is trying to put the boat down and walk away completely. Not keep carrying, not lean in, not remake, but instead to let go. To embrace freedom, even if that freedom can feel cold. After I finished up with this section of the game and defeated Malenia, I returned back to the capital city and stood before Radagon. Radagon is the stagnation and the shackle of the lands between. He is the thing that creates and endures the cycle. This boss fight is the culmination of everything that this game has questioned the player with, and in this case, to me, it externalized what I needed to do. I needed to put that boat down. Radagon is the you that desperately wants to be wounded, that needs the label in order to survive. The slavery of godhood is slavery and pain and grief, but at least it is identity. At least to others and to yourself, it means something. Radagon is the full manifestation of what Godric fell to but wasn't strong enough to fully be. He is his ex-wife clinging desperately to the fragmentation of something stripped away from him the same way he stripped away marriage and motherhood from Rennala. Radagon marches and slams and limps his way through battle, a wounded god desperately clinging to the wound. Radagon is not only a part of Marika, Radagon is a part of you. Radagon is your fear, your doubt, your inability to take action. He is your insecurity, your shame, your pain, the iron ball you still carry despite being attached to no chain that forces you. In the same breath, in the same shaky oath, Marika is also part of you. Marika is the one that knows this cannot continue. She is the you that sees the cycle of betrayal, power, and godhood and knows it cannot be more. Marika begins the breaking and cannot do anything because Radagon holds her in suspense. She is the you that is known and understood internally by the wound, by the trauma, by the desire that the you that is Radagon cannot get rid of. What you come to fight when you enter that throne room isn't really the manifestation of the conflict and the inevitability that has shackled every other character in this world. When you fight the second Elden Lord, you aren't fighting Marika or Radagon. You're fighting someone who does and doesn't want to change, who wants things, however painful as they are, to be as they are, because as they are has become home. And eventually, you will defeat Radagon. You were always supposed to. And in his place, the Elden Beast will emerge. If you're anything like me, the Elden Beast Radagon Gauntlet was underwhelming compared to fights like Malenia and Margit from the beginning of the game. Radagon himself is easy to dodge and takes very little time to consistently get into a Phase 2. Phase 2, however, summons the Elden Beast, the manifestation of the ring itself, the monster that provided Radagon and Marika with the power that they had in the first place. The Elden Beast was initially kind of underwhelming because it's something that is so incredibly impersonal to me as a player. We didn't even know of its existence until this moment. It's a blob-like monster that can change its body into whatever it really needs to in order to continue to fight. But the fact that it can change, that it's impersonal to me, meant something, because everyone has their own Elden Beast. Everyone has that thing that causes us to carry our own Elden Ring, something that gave us power at one point that now threatens to destroy us, a thing that makes us want to let go of it and hold on in equal measure. The Elden Beast is impersonal to me because it is personal to Marika and Radagon. My Elden Beast doesn't look anything like the one we fight at the end of the game, and I'm sure that yours doesn't either, but you have one, and you know what it is without me needing to do or say anything but bring that fact to your acknowledgement. After slaying the beast, there's a bit of a quiet magnitude to the game. Marika's fragmented body is left upon the ground, and you're given the option to mend the Elden Ring. Depending on how you play the game, you get the opportunity to apply a few different runes to the ring and change how the endings work. In all of these, you become Queen Marika's third consort and the ruling Elden Lord of the land. The most optimistic of these is the Age of Perfect Order, an ending that claims to remove the fickleness of the gods, but still places the lands between under a greater weight of the greater will. The subtle implication or potential drawback is the question of whether or not this fickleness of the gods being removed also means that free will has become completely obsolete or very limited, as an Age of Perfect Order suggests a world where very few people will or can operate out of order. To be honest, becoming Marika's consort never interested me. No matter how optimistic of an ending or how much good our player character could enforce upon this world, to me it just felt like continuing the cycle and dragging everyone else along with me. Marika does not get to be freed. Radagon wins. The Elden Beast wins. The wound wins. But if you complete enough of Ranni the Witch's questline, and then you will get the opportunity to summon her, Ranni will appear and completely supplant Queen Marika as the Empyrean goddess of the lands between and take her place. She says,
I do solemnly swear to every living being and every living soul, now cometh the age of the stars. 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond. Into fear, doubt, and loneliness, as the path stretcheth into darkness. Well then, shall we? My fair consort eternal.
Ranni takes you as her consort, and the two of you bring about the Age of Stars. While it may feel eerie to frame beginning as a chill night into fear, doubt, and loneliness, it's actually more of a dual meaning. Firstly, the original Japanese translates this ending slightly differently. It suggests that the 1,000-year voyage into those things are only for her and her consort, as a honeymoon in the stars where the two of them alone will endure a new godlike order. But thematically, the Age of Stars does the one thing that none of the other endings do in earnest. Ranni allows the world to put down its boat, and shows us what it might look like to do that in the first place. Ranni, by taking the new order far from the lands between, subsequently frees all of the people in the lands between from the oppression of godhood and the Golden Order. She allows it to let go, and she allows herself to let go of all of the oppression and trauma that she suffered not only from godhood, but also the impending generational trauma imparted by her father that she refused to allow become a cycle. Ranni lets go of her own boat. And what's honestly scary about that is how little there is to really know about what comes next. To let go of everything, to be born again in the spiritual sense and in all others, is to start over from zero. Maybe, yes, that does mean a long night of coldness and loneliness and fear and doubt, but at least it is not the golden warmth of slavery and the label you needed to wear. I am entering my own personal Age of Stars after 22 years of living in my age of the Golden Order, and what I really love most about this allegory pushed through the game is how none of these characters could have done it alone. Marika needed the Tarnished, Ranni needed the Tarnished, and the Tarnished needed Ranni. This video is not your Tarnished. I am not your Tarnished. You alone are not your Tarnished. What this is me being the camel herder. Me saying that if you're holding on to something, now is the time to let go. The reason I made this video is because I have been in the lands between far before I started playing this game. I have been Radagon and Marika and Renala and Godric and Vike and Rykard and Ranni, and I have had my own Tarnish who have come alongside and helped me fight my Elden Beast to put down my boat. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that above all, one of my biggest reasons for never playing this game is because I am just not the type of person that could beat Elden Ring. But that was never true. And neither was any of the other stuff either. And I'm content I could let go of those labels and found myself in my Age of Stars. Cold, a little lonely, and certainly afraid, but at least no longer bound to the labels. It may be scary, and it may feel like stepping out into the vast coldness of the cosmos, but I truly hope from the bottom of my heart that one day you can be healed and you can be free. But until then, if I could borrow some words from the land of the enduring, don't you dare go hollow. And until next time, keep dreaming.